The public obsession with missile telemetry is a strategic diversion. The doomsday clock is not being advanced by the threat of a visible launch, but by a protocol that begins in absolute silence. The core vulnerability of a system built on record debt is not its physical assets, but its connectivity. The real launch on warning posture is not kinetic. It is the systematic severing of the global nervous system. The subsea data cables that transact trillions per second. Simultaneously, a low-orbit campaign of satellite blinding commences. Not destruction that is crude and detectable. Instead, a wave of directed energy or microshrapnel that permanently degrades sensor and communication arrays. The objective is not annihilation, but informational paralysis. This creates the blind Leviathan, a military superpower still possessing its full kinetic arsenal, but suddenly stripped of real-time intelligence, global banking access, and command and control. Its alliances, like the Japan-US pact contingent on Taiwan, become meaningless liabilities without constant data validation. The Leviathan is now a cornered animal. This state of induced panic is the required precondition for the true gambit, a limited, high-leverage kinetic strike to force an economic reset. The motive is not conquest. It is solvency. According to the New York Times, the world's richest nations are burdened by record-level debt. This is not a line item on a budget. It is a structural liability that renders the state itself insolvent. When a nation can no longer service its debt or fulfill its economic promises to its own population, it has two options: default and collapse, or force an external reset. The war is the reset. Examine the Russian Federation. CSIS analysis frames the Ukraine invasion not as a simple land grab, but as a strategic pivot away from an unsolvable domestic liability. Faced with an unpopular war and immense economic strain, the state externalizes the crisis. The kinetic operation becomes a high-leverage instrument to restructure the internal political and economic reality, transforming domestic dissent into a patriotic mandate. The war is a solvency event. This weakness forces the pivot to asymmetry. Conventional military dominance is expensive. An insolvent state cannot afford a protracted, symmetrical conflict. The blueprint, therefore, requires a different vector. Reports detail Washington weighing precision strikes against an Iranian government it assesses as the weakest since 1979. This is the protocol in action. The target's weakness is not a coincidence. It is a prerequisite. It creates the illusion of a low-cost, high-leverage kinetic operation to force a favorable outcome. The fatal flaw is the assumption of containment. As confirmed by senior officials regarding the Japan-US alliance, a localized crisis over Taiwan would trigger a systemic collapse of the entire treaty structure. In a globally leveraged system, every precision strike is a contagion vector. It does not cauterize a problem. It transmits the shockwave through the financial and military alliance network, guaranteeing a cascade failure. This is why scientists have moved the doomsday clock to its closest point ever to midnight. The math leads directly to the nuclear threshold. The entire protocol of asymmetric escalation pivots on a single brutal equation. According to analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, the kinetic cost of engagement has inverted. A $5 million main battle tank, the symbol of 20th century industrial power, can be neutralized by a $500 first-person view drone. This is not a balanced fight. It is an economic execution. The leverage is absolute. A 10,000 to 1 cost disparity that renders legacy military hardware a high-value liability, not an asset. This radical cost-effectiveness has triggered what strategists call the democratization of violence. The capability to project lethal, state-level force is no longer the exclusive monopoly of solvent superpowers with vast industrial bases. It is now accessible to any actor who can afford a consumer-grade device. This collapses the barrier to entry for kinetic action, turning every insolvent regime and non-state actor into a potential vector for systemic disruption. The power to liquidate a multi-billion-dollar armored column is now available off the shelf. For a militarily dominant but terminally indebted power, this economic inversion is not a threat. It's an opportunity. The low cost of precision strikes as weighed against targets in their weakest state makes the initial gamble of escalation appear mathematically sound. It creates a fatal incentive to launch what are perceived as low-cost, high-reward kinetic operations to force a reset. The math of the drone justifies the strike, but ignores the mathematical certainty of the blowback in a hyper-connected system of financial and military alliances. The regional instability you are witnessing is not the source of systemic risk, it is the symptom. These zones of chaos, whether flagged by travel warnings in places like South Africa or through escalating military posturing, are functioning as proxy laboratories. They are staging grounds for a new doctrine, asymmetric escalation, engineered to resolve a solvency crisis with kinetic force. The core protocol is simple. A militarily dominant but financially insolvent power identifies a weaker state actor as a target. According to Middle East Eye reports, Washington is actively weighing precision strikes on Iranian officials, not when Iran is strong, but precisely because the government is perceived as the weakest since 1979. The weakness of the target is the bait. The trigger is not geopolitical provocation, it is economic desperation. Data from the New York Times confirms that the world's richest nations are burdened by record-breaking debt, which now threatens global growth. This creates a structural incentive for a high-leverage gamble. A limited kinetic strike designed to reset the economic board, disrupt energy markets, or force a new financial arrangement. The fatal flaw in this blueprint is the illusion of a localized strike. The system of global alliances functions as a contagion vector. As confirmed by the Japanese Prime Minister, the Japan-US alliance would collapse if a Taiwan crisis is ignored. Any kinetic action in one of these gray zones becomes a liability that cascades through the entire network, triggering mutual defense pacts and financial countermeasures with mathematical certainty. CSIS analysts assess that these gray zones are where the launch on warning protocol is being beta tested not for nuclear war, but for economic war. The goal is to apply maximum leverage with minimum kinetic cost. However, the interconnected nature of global finance and security guarantees that any such test will escape the lab. It is why scientists have moved the doomsday clock closer than ever to midnight. The risk is not miscalculation, it is a calculated protocol escalating toward a predictable system failure. The launch on warning doctrine is not a choice. It is a mathematical protocol. A nuclear-armed state detects an incoming kinetic strike. The flight time is under 30 minutes. The protocol dictates that a retaliatory launch must occur before the incoming warhead's impact. Waiting for confirmation is not an option. Waiting means decapitation and the inability to respond. This protocol contains a systemic flaw for the digital age. Analysts at RUSI term this the fog of digital war. A sophisticated cyber attack can blind early warning radar and satellite networks. The commander is presented with data that is either absent or untrustworthy. The screen is blank. Is the silence a malfunction or the prelude to impact? The dilemma becomes absolute. If the threat is real, failure to launch guarantees annihilation. If the threat is a digital ghost, a spoof, launching initiates global thermonuclear war based on a phantom. The protocol forces the commander to make a zero-sum bet with planetary stakes. Fear, not verified intelligence, becomes the final launch vector. This is a feature of asymmetric warfare, not a bug. A weaker actor can leverage a cyber attack to force a nuclear power into an impossible position. The insolvency crisis, source number 3, and willingness to consider precision strikes, source number 2, signal a desperation that adversaries can exploit. As the doomsday clock moves to its closest point, ever to midnight, source number 1, this calculated ambiguity becomes the primary accelerant toward a global cascade failure. The protocol of asymmetric escalation is not initiated by a declaration of war. It is triggered by a solvency crisis. The record debt held by dominant state actors, as documented by the New York Times, is not merely a threat to global growth. It is the primary accelerant for kinetic action. With the doomsday clock warning of unprecedented peril, the system requires a non-attributable test of adversary response protocols before a full-spectrum strike. CSIS analysts model this preliminary phase as the calibration shot, a limited, high-impact strike against critical infrastructure designed for plausible deniability. Its purpose is twofold: to measure the target's political and technical reaction time, and to signal to the global system that collateral is about to be forcibly repriced. The target must be perceived as weak. Reports confirm Washington assesses the Iranian government is at its weakest since 1979 and is actively weighing precision strikes. The calibration forecast for the next 12 months is therefore a mathematical certainty. Expect a sudden, catastrophic, and attribution impossible outage at a major Iranian port or national data center. It will be presented as a technical failure. It is not. It is the system's launch on warning signal, executed because the weakness of the target has been confirmed and the insolvency of the attacker makes the gamble necessary.